Welcome to this quick guide from Maya. This is going to be a quick rundown of the tools, the interface, and just general tricks for what we're going to do all throughout this series, just so we don't have to run through it during the main line of the series. If you're already familiar with Maya, you can skip this video. If you're not familiar with Maya, this is a very good starting point. So first, we're going to start out with the interface. Maya is, in a sense, kind of a really complex software and really simple at the same time. This may not be what your interface looks like when you first download it. It's been a while since I've had to freshly download the software, so I'm not entirely sure what it looks like when you first download it. But this is how I typically have it set up every time I get Maya for the first time. I set it up this way because it's the most useful for me. So first, we're going to go through kind of the ways that I have it set up and try to get yours set up the same way, so it makes the rest of the tutorial series easier. If you don't have these panels, if you don't have some of these panels, I'm going to show you how to get them. So first, Maya is a very panel-based software, right? It's a lot of different windows, so like you can drag and drop things wherever you want. I'm going to get rid of some of these windows so I can show you how to do it in case you're missing them. So I just got rid of the window that was right here. If I want that back, that is my tool settings. If I look over here on the left side of my screen, these are my tools. These are my select tool, my lasso tool, my brush tool, my move tool, my rotate tool, my scale tool, and if I kind of hover over them a little bit and I leave my mouse cursor there, I get a nice little tooltip that tells me what it is. And if you look in the top right corner of that box, you can see the letter R. And that tells me that if I hit that letter R on my keyboard, it'll switch to that tool. So a lot of things in Maya, while it seems complex, if I hold over it, it sometimes tells me what they are, or it tells me what the tooltip is for it. So like mirror, this is the mirror tool. This creates a torus. Like this creates a cube. And if I was to create that cube again, I shouldn't have deleted it, but if I create that cube again, and I am currently in my move tool, if I hover over this and I see that, or I hover over this and I see that it is my move tool, and I see that there's a W, I can hit W and it automatically switches, and now I can move my object. If I hit Control Z again, you can see in the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to put all my things right here. If I hit Control Z, then it goes back to where it was. So those are my move tools. Now, that window that I had over here, how do I get that back? Well, there's a couple different ways. Those are my tool settings. So again, these are my tools. Each tool in Maya has its own setting, has its own coordinated set of settings that you can kind of tweak to your needs and desires and for the specific project you're working on. So one of the easiest ways to get that back is if you have whatever the active tool is, or if it's one of your main tools, you can double click it and bring that box back to get all of your tool settings. Now there's a lot here. We're going to maybe go through that a little bit later, but for right now, we're just going to take the tool settings and we're going to dock it right back to where it was. You can see that blue bar is there, which means I can put it there and it will snap into position. I'll move that up a little. So that's my tool settings. You probably don't have that there, so that's how you get it back, but that's not the only way you get it. You can also go up here into Windows and into General Editors, and you have tool settings right here. And it does the exact same thing. It's already open over here, so it's not going to open another bespoke window. But if you don't have this, that's where you find it. Same thing with your modeling toolkit. If you're looking for that, this is a very helpful piece. This is a very helpful window. It's got a lot of different tools in it. It's got a lot of different things that we need for our modeling workflow. We'll kind of go over later. But if we wanted this window, say this one wasn't here, same thing. We can go up here to our Windows tab and we go into Modeling Editor. We go into our Modeling Editor, Modeling Toolkit. It's right there. I click on it, it's already here. And over here, I have two different things. I have my channel box layer editor and my attribute editor. We won't spend a lot of time in the channel box layer editor, but we're going to keep it there just in case we need it. And then we have our attribute editor, which we're going to spend a lot of time in. Our attribute editor controls, it's kind of like our tool settings and our modeling toolkit. It's going to control a lot of the things that have to do with this cube. Like we go here into our polycube 1, which is the node of this cube. Maya, when I say node of this cube, Maya in the background, in the kind of behind the scenes, is running a lot of different nodes, like things that are kind of connected together, so it figures out what's going on and how it's working. Uh, and this is the cube node, where we can adjust different variables of the cube to get kind of different things that we want. If we want to add edge loops, we want to add edge loops along the Y, the X, or the Z. We can add as many as we want. And if we don't want those, then, we can just hit Control Z until they go away. So that's kind of the upfront interface. But if we hit spacebar, we're greeted with our 4 different views. We have our perspective view, which is most of the time how we're going to work, but then we also have our top view, our front view, and our side views. This is a more traditional CAD approach to how you model, like how you would model for like architectural visualization, or how you would model for other things, but it's also very useful for a lot of very specific things. Like if I was making a door, I would want a lot of times or like a very specific archway for a building. I would want to probably work in my front view so I can understand that I'm matching both sides, and I can get really precise cuts and really precise inlays, and I can even just have to work on one side and mirror it. Like we'll show more of it later when we get into the actual production workflow, but this is pretty much a very useful view. So if we go back, we hit spacebar and we go back to our other view, if you hold down spacebar, you'll notice this is going to keep counting in the background. Please ignore that. I don't know how to change that. So if we hold down our spacebar, we can see that we have what's called the Maya pie menu. Everything in Maya can be done through this pie menu right here. Let me reset that counter because it's bothering me. Everything in Maya can be done through this pie menu right here. Say if we wanted to spawn a cube, we can do it a couple different ways. We can go up here into what's called our shelf. These are our shelves where we have different things. We have our curves, we have our poly modeling, our sculpting, our rigging, animation, rendering, VFX, caching, custom. We'll come back to this in a little bit. Arnold, Bifrost, Mesh, motion graphics, and Xgen. You may or may not have all of these. You may have only a few of them. You may have all of them. It doesn't quite matter. Well, there's only a few specific ones we need for what we're doing. So we're going to go into our poly modeling, and if we wanted to spawn a cube, like we did earlier, we can go into poly modeling and we can just left click on cube, and we have one right in the middle of the screen. If we hit delete, we can get rid of that. Or we can hold down spacebar and we can move kind of where we want our mouse to go. So we hold down spacebar and we can see, if we look here, create, and we can go into polygon primitives, cube. And you can do everything that you could normally do up here from right here in the spacebar. Or there's another way, there's one more way that you can do it. So if you don't have this and you don't want to do this, you can do everything from up here as well in the top taskbar. So you can go create as well, polygon primitives, cube. It all just comes kind of down to how best is your workflow. A lot of people typically use these pie menus, and you can see they're kind of all over the place. There's so many different pie menus. If I hold down control and left click, if I hold down space and left click, and I hold down, if I want to change like I said earlier, if I hit spacebar and I have this, and I go back, there's also, if I hold down spacebar and left click, I can quick snap to this specific view that I'm in to whatever I want. Right now, we're in perspective view, I can change it to right view. So if I hit spacebar, I have 2 X views, where if you wanted, instead of hitting spacebar every time, and like if I wanted perspective view and I hit spacebar and I want to go to my top view, I can do that. Instead, I can hold down my spacebar and I can memorize kind of where these are, and I can go top view, or I can go right view, or front view, or back to perspective view, all in the same view without having to go to this screen. It all comes down to how you want to work, what is the most comfortable for you. One more thing about, or two more things about the interface. Uh, three more. Sorry, three more. So right here is our outliner. We're going to spend a lot of time on this. This is kind of, if you notice, every time I spawn a cube, every time I spawn one, it's going to spawn right here. This is where everything in our scene is going to live. To a degree, there's going to be some things that are hidden from us. I'll explain later what I mean by hidden from us and kind of how things work in Maya. But for the most part, your models, your transforms, your rigs, everything is going to live right here. You can find it, you can search it, you can rename it. So I can double click this, I can rename it to Boxy Boy. I can rename it to whatever I want. And then a nice search bar here, I can search for Boxy Boy, and it just goes back to the only thing with that name. So it kind of ease of access there. Or I can delete that. So this is our hierarchy. We're going to spend a lot of time here. This is our timeline. We might use it a little later when we have to do. We're going to do some very light simulation work, and I'll just to show in the FX tab, and when we do like very basic cloth or ropes or whatever, we're going to use the timeline down here in the bottom of Maya to do quick simulations and quick rendering so that we can get what we want out of it. And the final thing with the interface, you've probably noticed I have this nice little box here. This is called our heads up display. This is not on by default. How you get this is we go to display, we go to heads up display, and we go to poly count. And I just turned it off, but just to show you how to turn it back on, we go back up here to display, heads up display again, and we go to poly count. This is very useful. It tells us like what, especially if you're working within budgets, if you're working within certain restrictions, it tells you where you're currently at. So like if I spawn this cube again, you notice it's a very basic cube. It's a 6-sided cube where we can look here. We can see that there's 6 faces on this cube. There is 12 tries on this cube. So tries typically are double the amount of quads, and how many different UV sections of this cube there are, how many different vertices of the cube there are. So we have 8, we have 12. And if you notice, when I'm not selecting it, these are, you can see different numbers here. When I select it, there are different numbers, or the same numbers here. So what this is your second list is your active object. So there's no object selected, there's 0. If you click it, this is what your active object is. And then this is your entire scene. So we're going to delete this cube again. And we're going to kind of go into the basic controls. You should probably see me panning around and moving back and forth and kind of just moving screens. So how I'm doing that, sorry, my mouse input's not down here. How I'm doing that is I'm holding down, if I want to rotate around the scene, I'm holding Alt, and I'm clicking my left mouse button. So I'm doing those at the same time, to continuously holding down Alt and the left mouse button to pan around a orbital spot, which is right here in the center of the screen, or if I move over here, it's now over here. It's wherever it is in the center of the frame of my screen becomes my orbital spot. So how you probably saw me doing this. How I'm doing that is I'm holding down Alt again, and I'm pressing down the middle mouse scroll button. And that allows me to pan around the screen. And then how I zoom in and out is I'm holding down Alt once more, and I'm scrolling, or if I want, and it's kind of jagged, depends on your mouse button. If you want a smoother experience, and sometimes you have to do based on where your center of orbit is, I'm holding down mouse again, and I'm holding down right mouse button for a smoother experience, and I can continuously zoom in, continuously zoom out. The reason why that is useful is because when I'm doing this starts to slow down the closer you can see it starting to slow down the closer I get to where it thinks my center of orbit is, or the more I zoom out, it starts to slow down again based on proportional to how far away that orbit is. And we don't want that sometimes, so we use the mouse button, or we use the Alt plus right on the mouse to kind of get us where we want, get us closer, and reset that orbital every time that we touch it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our scale. The Maya scale is set to centimeters by default. Centimeters is okay to work in, but Unreal by default is also in centimeters. But we don't want to work in centimeters because that means we're working in kind of multiples of 100, and you're dealing with very large units. And when you're dealing with very large scenes, it starts to get very complicated. It starts to get very tedious and tiresome. I'll show a great example. So like if I spawn this cube right now, and I hit F to frame the object in my screen, and I go over here into my channel box and layer editor, I can set the scale, and I'm going to set my Y scale 180 centimeters. This seems like a very tall cylinder, this seems like a very tall cube. So now I'm going to set my other scales. I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to select my Z scale at the same time. I'm going to use Control to select both of those, make them highlighted, and I'm going to set this to 50 centimeters. The reason I did that is because the typical human, the scale mannequin character in Unreal is 180 centimeters tall, or 1.8 meters. When I look at this object and I look at it in scale of our scene, we're dealing with 180, 50, and 50. Those are kind of hard to deal with, especially when we start dealing with larger scenes. So what we're going to do is, if we go into Windows, we go into Settings and Preferences, and then Preferences, and then there's a lot of different settings here. If we go into Settings, Working Units, and where it says linear, we change this to meters. We can see that our grid has changed. Our grid is now proportional to meters. So if we click another cube into our scene, it spawns at 1, 1, and 1. This is now, instead of 1 centimeter, it's now 1 meter. I'm going to move this guy over just a little bit so he's in relation to this one, and we're going to set similar scales, except for this time, we're going to set it in proportion to meters. So we're going to go there's 100 centimeters in a meter, so we're going to go 1.8, and we're going to select this and this again, and instead of 50, we're going to hit 0.5. Now, we have the same cubes standing next to each other. They're exactly identical, but if we click this one, we're dealing with units of powers of 100, so 50, 180, and 50. But here, we're dealing with 0.5, 1.8, and 0.5. One of those is significantly easier to deal with, so it's just a lot easier to deal with meters. So we're going to drag to select both of these, we're going to delete them, and we're going to pan back out so we can show the rest of our grid. What else I like to do is I like to turn on screen space ambient occlusion. I'm going to turn that guy on right there. He's right here. You can see the tooltip screen space ambient occlusion. And what that does is if I spawn 2 cubes, I move one over just a little bit. I'm going to hit R to put it in the scale mode. I'm going to use this to scale it on its axis, pull it down. You can kind of see there's a little bit of shadowing here. Now, I'm going to show you what happens if I turn that off. There is no shadowing. And the reason that's really important is it helps beginner people and just people in general, help them understand what they're looking at when they look at objects in 3D space. Because we as humans kind of interpolate objects as having that ambient depth, and without that, it's really hard to understand these objects and what we're looking at, especially when you start getting significantly more complex objects. Now let's start getting into actual modeling, and we're start understanding what basic tips of modeling are. So one of the things I'm going to look at is when I select this cube just with a left click, there's a couple different component modes, and we can visualize that right here in our modeling toolkit. That's one of the reasons why it's good to leave it open. You can see what mode you're in persistently, but you don't need it, but you'll see why in a moment. Right now we are in our object mode, which you can see the tooltip there is F8. And what the object mode is the entire object. So if I go into W to my move tool, it is the entire object. It is the whole shebang. It's everything that you see right here. When I click on it, it is everything. So I'm going to hit Control Z to go back to where it was in the center of the frame. And then, so the next one down the list is our vertex selection. You can see both here that it's changed and the actual physical object has changed. It's changed into a sort of wireframe mode where you can see red vertices all on the object. In this mode is exactly what it sounds like, because I can select individual vertices and I can move and scale those as I want to. Move them, I can click them, and I can, even though it's not really going to do anything because it's a single vertice, I can rotate them, or I can select two of them, and that's when you start seeing rotation. This is just really the component mode for rotation. And then, so one step further, we go to edges, and then we can do the same thing. We can select edges, we can move them around, we can do kind of whatever we want with them. And then that is sequentially, it goes in order. So we have F8, F9, and then this is F10. And as you can probably guess, the next one is F11. This is face mode. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's different polygonal faces or triangulated faces. So if we were to have a triangle here, it would be any face that is on the object, regardless if it's quad, triangle, quadrangle, n-gon, regardless of what it is, face mode will select it. And the last one here, we're not going to use right now. We're not going to use for a little while. This is F12. This is our UV mode. This is more of a mode that allows us to adapt and form UVs in the UV shell, which we'll get to later, and we'll probably touch on this more and why that's important. Another really important thing in Maya is transforms and history. Like I said, Maya is a node-based editor, but it does it all in the backgrounds, and it's a very destructive workflow. And what I mean by that is if I was to duplicate this object with Control D and then hit R to scale it again, scale it down, I'm going to move it here. So now I have two objects. I can see P1 and P2. If I select both of these objects with either selecting them or dragging to select them with my move tool, then I can go up here into mesh and I hit combine. Now what that did is it combined the objects, but I have these three nodes now instead of one. And what it's doing is it's remembering the original objects that are there. And if I take them and I wish to delete these, it would delete the existing object because these nodes are existing in real time, or are existing still in the nodes in the background, and it's kind of creating a visual for them. So what we need to do is we need to break those connections so that it doesn't have those anymore. So we have an independent object away from these. And if you don't do that, it starts causing a lot of problems. If I was to, say, duplicate this 30 more times and duplicate one by one and add them into each other, I would have 15 layers of this, and Maya would get mad and crash. It's a very common thing. So what I can do is instead, I can select the object, or I don't need to select the object, but I can select the object, and I can go up here into edit mode. I can go into delete all by type and history, and it will get rid of all of those connections. So now I am left with the new object that I had. It's fresh, as if nothing happened, as if I spawned it from here, and I have no detailed connections history in the background. One of the other things about Maya, and when you start dealing with game engines and you start dealing with animations and simulations, is you want to reset transforms. And what I mean by that is I'm going to leave this layer box, channel box editor open, and I'm going to show you what happens when I start moving the object around. So I'm going to start updating the object, I'm going to start translating it, and you can see right away that it's changing the rotations. Now, if I start updating the scales of the object as well, you can see it's changing it all here. If I was to move it over here, then you over up here and over here. Here, let's make it so they're all non-zero. So now you can see that it was here, it's over here now, it's rotated all different directions, scaled off all different directions, and it has all these different numbers now. if I was to take this into a game engine right now, all of these different numbers are essentially getting stored in memory and being exported with the object, and it's going to start creating problems. I.e., it's going to think that it should be over here when it's not, and it might cause a scale issue where it might send this thing, which is called the gizmo, and might put it here instead of right here. It could crush the object, it could misconform the object, it could do all kinds of things. We don't want that. What we want to do is we want to delete the transforms so we can reset all of these back to 0, while keeping this object where we placed it. So how we can do that is we can go up here to modify, and we go freeze transforms. And what that does is it resets everything as if this is a brand new object that we just put into this 3D space. And now if we were to export this into our game engine, it should theoretically, depending on the game engine and depending on our settings, keep our cursor exactly where it is and in relation to world space. Now, let's delete this guy and let's talk about some basic modeling tools. So we're going to spawn a cube into our scene, and we're going to frame it into our center of our frame with F, and we're going to start talking about some different modeling tools. So the first modeling tool we're going to talk about is Multicut. And Multicut is a very powerful tool. You're going to use it all the time in modeling. One of the easiest ways to remember where it is up here in our edit mesh tool, or in our mesh tools. It's right here called Multicut. And you know it's active when you go over vertice and you start seeing a line coming off of it, or you can go over here and see that it's in your last used tool. But if you want a significantly quicker way to use the tool, you can either use the radial menu, or what I like to do is I like to leave the tool, and I like to do Control, Shift, and X, and it will automatically take me to Multicut. That is the hot tool for Multicut. Now, Multicut's a great tool. It's very useful for a lot of different things. You can obviously say click here on edge and click here, and hit enter, and it will create a brand new face. But say you don't want that. You want more uniformity to what you're doing. If I want, say, a dot, a new vertex right here in the middle of this line, I can hold down shift and it creates a snap. It'll automatically do 50%. I can put it there, and then I can hold it, and I can get increments of 10 right out of the bat. So I can just drop it right there at 50%. I can hit enter, and then if I go hit F9, I can see that it created a new vertex. Now, if you remember the tools from earlier, the tool settings, if I look over here, I can see all of my tool settings are right here, and I have snap step. So if I wanted, instead of 10 degrees, I wanted 5 degrees, I can change that number to 5. If I go over here and I hold shift again, I drop it, I now have steps of 5. Get rid of that vertex. I like to leave it at steps of 10 because it's easier to do the math based around it. So I can leave it at 10. Now, say I wanted more than just a dot. Say I wanted a line. Say I wanted an edge loop. I can hold shift. Say I wanted it to go all the way through the object. So if I can hold shift, I can also hold control, and it will create an edge. And if I continue holding shift, it will snap to one of those 10 vertices that are now being simulated across this line. If I don't want to, I can let go of shift, and you freeform wherever I want it. Well, for sake, let's put it right in the center. And now I can do exactly the same thing right here, and exactly the same thing right here. And I have subdivided my cube in half, or I've doubled the amount of lines on this cube. The next big tool you're probably going to use a lot is Extruding. So what Extruding is it's exactly that. It's taking this face, and if I hit Control E, then I can pull it out, and I can make a brand new face with extensions from where it came from. Now, I can do if you notice when I undo it a little bit, just to make sure to follow the problem there. sometimes it likes to create a face even when you hit Control Z. So if I grab this same face, when I hit Control E again, you can see you probably noticed it the first time, but if I move it over here, I get a lot of nice tools and a lot of nice little features here for things that I can do. So if you're not seeing all these tools, what you like say if you didn't have local scale or taper or scale, what you can do is you can go up here into this little box right here. You can click it and it has all these new tools. We're not going to go through all of them, but it has all these fun little things you can deal with. So there's a couple different ways you can go about it. If you click out of the tool, for example, if I hit Control E and I click out here, it still did the cut. So if I grab this face and I hit W, it still did it. I just lost the ability to control it the way that it was controlling it, if that makes sense. So if I hit Control E again, I go here just to get this menu back. There's a lot of different tools I can deal with here. So say I wanted to have this face, but I wanted to make it smaller. Instead of pulling it out, I just wanted to make it smaller. So I can grab this, this, and this. I can go 0.25, 0.5, and Z-scale on a planar surface doesn't exactly matter, but I do it there for consistency's sake anyway. I now have brought it in 25% or 75% from the original size. Now I have this, and now I can move it in or out. I can move it in or out. I want to hit Control E and bring this guy out. Now I have a new face that I can extrude out, and I can play with it any more or as much as I want still. So I can do local scale. I can kind of move it in. I can move it in. I can move this one bigger. I can mess with the offset. I can add divisions into it to make it more subdivided. The sky's kind of the limit on things you can do with the extrude tool and mixing it with the subdivide tool and the kind of making whatever you want. Now say if you have an object, if I delete those and I bring another object, say I have an object where I'm doing the same thing where I'm just hitting F to frame it in each one, that I want both sides to be exactly the same. What I can do is I can go up here into Symmetry in my poly modeling section. I go into Symmetry and I can set it kind of however I want. If I'm going to go Object X, then if I go here into this frame and I go into my F11 to go into this, into my face view, you can kind of see what it's doing where if I grab this face, it mirrors the selection on the other side. And if I hit Control E, I bring it out, it's duplicating both of them on the same side. Or everything I'm doing on one side, it's doing it on the other. Right. Where this tool doesn't work well is if I wanted to suddenly change and do it this way, then it sometimes doesn't work well based on what I did in the first axis view. Another fun object and fun way to work that really helps out a lot is live surfaces. I don't have anything that typically can work in a live surface at the moment. Typically, you would start using like VFX, or you would use snapping. Like if I had a bolt that I wanted to move on top of this object, like if I had this guy and I wanted to scale this down, and I selected him and I said live surface, I can now move this guy all along the surface of this object, and he's going to be snapped to it at all times. This is also super useful for when you start doing retopology of a high sculpt object, which we will do later in the series. It's a super useful tool. You're not going to use it a lot, but it's very useful. Now, another thing you probably see me do a lot is Control Z. So I just spawn this cube. If I hit Control Z, it goes away. Now, another lesser known fact is if I want it back, I have to hit Control Y. That's undo and redo, and they're super useful. You're going to use them all the time. Now, some other useful things that you're going to use in Maya is if I go into my vertice selection again, and I click on a vertice, there's a couple different ways you can select. If I want to select all the vertices on top of this, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can either manually select them by hitting each one and doing what you need to do, or you can hold shift and hold multiple selections. You can also hold control to do multiple selections as well. Or you can go into your whatever face is aligned, so you can show what you select what you want on the top. Say I wanted all the ones on the top here. Or a very quick way, say if I wanted to select all these, is if I select the face they're all attached to and I hit Control and then the next component mode that I'm going for. So I'll do that again. So if I wanted all of the vertices that were connected to this face, so 1, 2, 3, 4, I know the next component mode I'm going into is vertices. If I go into F11 mode, which is face, which I'm in currently, and I hit Control, and I'm holding on Control, and I hit the next component mode I'm going into, which is F9, it'll select all the vertices that are connected to that standard face. And I can do the same thing. So now I have if I have all these vertices right now, if I wanted all of the edges, so 1, 2, 3 connected to that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 connected to these vertices, I can hit Control and F10 and it'll select all those vertices as well. Now, something you need to be mindful of when you're doing this is if I was to, we started with this face, obviously it was face right here. If I went into F11 mode or F10, and now I have all of the edges, and I hit Control F9, that's all of my vertices. But I went back to Control F10, you see it selected all of the ones below it now. And if I went into F11, it's slowly growing the selection because it's selecting more than what was originally selected. So that's just something to watch for when you start doing this. Another thing is when you delete something on an object, you can delete just the face by hitting delete, by Control Z, or you can hit Control X. That is the hotkey for delete. Control D. But say sometimes if I go into my multicut and I just start cutting around, I taper that off so it ends it. I'm gonna kind of hide this off just a little bit for the demonstration, because otherwise it's gonna get very wonky if I don't. Maya really likes its quad faces, so it likes having things that make sense sometimes for when we do the next thing we're about to do. So just bear with me one moment. It doesn't have to look pretty, it just has to look. Okay, say we have all of these vertices and these faces in the center up here, and we just want a flat face again. One of the things we can do is we can go into we can hit F9, and we can select a vertice and we can delete it. Well, if you notice, it's not actually deleted. So sometimes deleting vertices is not that easy. One of the things we can do is we can go into F10 and we can select, say, everything here. And if we want to deselect, or before I say deselect, if we look, we have, this is the only face not selected. Everything up here is selected. We don't want everything up here selected. So if we want to deselect this, we hold down Shift again, and we only select the things we don't want that are already been selected. And now we have all the top faces selected. And we're trying to get rid of all these small faces. One of the things we can do Control F9 to go back to here. We can Shift select the corner pieces, the ones we want to keep. And then if we have all these ones selected, we can hit Control and Delete, and it'll get rid of them. It'll get rid of all the ones we don't want. So now we're just left with a flat face of a cube once more. Another thing that we might use all the time is if we have, say, we want to grab this face again, or say we have another face that's super close, and we don't want this face anymore. When we want to merge all these vertices, so one of the things we can do is we can grab these vertices here, and we can hold V and snap them back on top of the existing vertex. And then we can highlight both of them because there's two of them sitting on top of each other. And we go up here and we have a thing called merge to center, which just merges those two vertices together. One of the other things that we can, that we're going to have to get used to, and we do a lot of, is we assign materials. And how we do that, we can do that in a couple different ways. One of the ways is right here in the viewport, we can hold down our right click to get this menu where we can hot select all of our different view components. We can get a bunch of other actions, but we're most interested in assign new material. And we get this nice little menu right here. We can assign a specific material. And we're just going to stick to a Lambert material. And what that's going to do is it's going to create us a new material over here somewhere in our attribute editor where you can see Lambert 2. We can rename it to whatever we want. So let's say box 1. So we have a new material that is a Lambert material named box 1. And we have a bunch of different attributes we can change. So if we want to make the cube red, we can make the cube red. One of the other ways we can do that gives us a lot of control is up here in our top menu is our hyper shade editor. We open this. This is essentially our material editor in Maya. This is everything that we work in. This is pretty much anything we're going to do. We're going to assign it here. I like the other way, but this gives us more control. So what we can do is if these are all of our active materials in our scene, we can create a new material over here, Lambert. We can just click on it and we create a brand new Lambert material. And we can hover over it and we can say box 2, box _2 for consistency. And now we have over here all the same controls that we saw in our base right here, but what we have is the ability to control this material with different inputs. We're not going to do that right now, but we'll show it a little later, or we'll show it when we get into the actual demonstration in the tutorial series. But if we had a texture component, we can plug it in the color. If we had opacity, we can plug it in. If we had transparency, translucency, or diffuse and normals, we can plug it into here and get a live representation in Maya. But for right now, we're just going to change the color of box 2. We're going to change it to something like a neon green color. And so if you notice, it's not assigned, but we still have our component here. It's because we have it active. Load it on a different window. Because we have it active in this window. So it is the most active thing. It's a weird quirk with Maya that sometimes the main interface will be reacting to things that you're doing in a different viewport, and we'll see that in just a moment when we get into the UV editor. So we're going to close this. We're going to select our object. If we notice it change back to box 1, if we want to change it to box 2, we can hold down our right menu again. You go down to assign existing material and box 2, and we change the color of it. Now, if you're not seeing your color, or if you're not seeing a texture that you assigned, or you're not seeing anything, there's different view modes in Maya. So they are on your keyboard. They're the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right underneath your function keys. So right now we're on number 5. Number 5 is the default view. That is your default shaded view. Number 6 is your default texture view. 4 is a wireframe mode. 3 is a mode we're not going to work in, but this is our smooth shaded mode. 2 is our cage mode, and 1 is our default view again, but it's still using wireframe. So we're going to go back to 5 to show our default view. The last thing we're going to kind of touch on in this video is we're just going to show a quick intro of the UV editor. So how we get to that is we go up here in our top tab, we can see our UVs and UV editor. And we get 2 boxes. I like to snap it on here because it's very easy to lose this box and it's a pain to get back. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can just go up here and it is all of your tools are here as well, but it's nice to have them all in the same spot. In your UV editor, you've got a lot of nice tools. You have all of your regular tools, so you have your cut and sew if you want new seams, if you want new whatever. So for example, if you want to see your UV preview, you can go up here and it's a little button and you can see what it's doing. It's kind of hard to work in, but you can see it's there. If I hit F10, then you can see what I have selected. So this and this are on either side of this, on this line. And if I wanted to say, make this a new one, I can hit, cut, or you hit cut. And now I have a new UV line and I have 2 UV shells when I had 1. Or if I wanted to, get rid of that. If I wanted to sew them back together, I can hit sew and now they're fine. So what I was going to show you earlier in this component mode, this UV component mode, if I was to go into this view, and I was supposed to hit F10, and I was in my edge view, or if I was to hit F9, and I was in my vertice view, I click on a vertice. If you notice, if I turn this off, if you notice, the highlighted vertice is it's collecting 2 different vertices because the UV editor, while it is showing the object on a rendered 2D space, the vertice you have selected is a duplicate. So these are 2 different vertices, but on the 3D object, they're the same vertice. So that's why we have F12, so that we can highlight a vertice, a quote-unquote vertice, and only have the one selected that is actually selected. So now if I click this open and I move this around, it's only affecting that one. But if I hit F9 and I select this one vertice again, it's selecting both things attached to that one vertice, if that makes sense. All right, and I think that will be all the tips, the quick guide for this video of just to get us through the rest of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this prerequisite. Well, let me know what you think, and goodbye.